Hi everyone! Today I'm going to read The Youngest Marcher, which is the true story of Audrey Faye Hendricks, a young civil rights activist, and the book was written by Cynthia Levinson. So I'm going to read as I go and then show you the pictures after I read each page. Alright. Whenever Mike flew into town, Audrey and her mama cooked barbecue ribs, stewed greens, sweet potato souffle, and Audrey's favorite, hot rolls baptized in butter. Other folks knew Mike as Martin or Dr. King. The Hendricks used his nickname. They did the same with other ministers too, like Frederick Shuttlesworth and Jim Bevel. And Mike blessed the feast. Mama expected Audrey to keep still during supper. But when grown-ups talked about wiping out the segregation laws that kept black and white people apart in Birmingham, she just had to speak up. Audrey intended to go places and do things like anybody else. I want to eat my ice cream inside Newberry's. I want to sit downstairs at the Alabama. I don't want hand-me-down school books. But stools at the counter, plush movie theater seats, books so fresh they crack when you open them, those were for the white children. Hush, hissed Mama. 9-year-old children should not speak in front of company, especially ministers, like Mike, Fred, and Jim, who were bringing dreams of justice. Audrey knew all about segregation. She knew how to pay the driver at the front of the bus, then step off and walk around to the back door, drink from the fountain with the dirty bowl and the warm water, use the freight elevator at department stores downtown, and front row seats, cool water in elevators with white-gloved operators. Those laws that were there for the white people. Every Monday night, Audrey and her mama and daddy and her uncles and aunts and cousins joined neighbors and friends at Fred's church for worship, fellowship, and testimony. She sang and she swayed along with movement choir, her voice spirited and spiritual. Black and white together, we shall overcome. For once, she did not have to keep still. Then came testimonies. White store owners won't hire me. Ku Kluxers chased me. Policemen called me names. The hateful stories made Audrey squirm. She tried to tell her mama, that's not right. Shh. How could Mama expect her to hush? She had many things that she had to make right, but what could she do? When Mike visited Fred's church, thousands of people crowded around to hear him preach. In a voice as taut as steel cables, as smooth as glass, he intoned, segregation is morally wrong and sinful. That's true, fired up. Audrey sat even taller in her chair. An unjust law is no law at all, he proclaimed. Audrey had listened to Mike explain his plan at her supper table and knew what he meant. If a law is unjust, you have to disobey it. Sit down inside Newberry's, picket those white stores, march to protest those unfair laws. Why, even marching was against the law. They would get arrested. Fill the jails, Mike exclaimed. Fill Birmingham's jails so full that policemen cannot squeeze in one more person. Pack cells so tight that police will have to quit arresting people for demanding their rights. Audrey just knew Mike's plan would work. She twisted in her pew to see which grown-ups would walk down the aisle, volunteer for jail. But they mostly stayed put, eyes staring at their feet, hands on their knees. Feet, hands, and knees did not move. Fill the jails, Mike pleaded, meeting after meeting. But heads shook. All around her, Audrey heard, no, it's best not to break those segregation laws. The boss man will fire me, the landlord will evict me from my home, and police will hurt me. If nobody protested, Mike's plan would fail. Police could keep arresting anyone, anytime, for anything, forever. Audrey would never be able to go places and do things like everybody else. And one night, Jim announced a new idea. If grown-ups won't do it, fill the jails. We're going to do it with children. Audrey leaped to her feet. I want to go to jail, she declared. Mama looked deep and saw that Audrey's eyes begged. Please. Okay, Mama said. Audrey strutted down the aisle. She was going to jail. Two mornings later, she put on a fresh pressed pinafore and shiny Mary Janes with turned-down socks. Protesters got to look nice. In the meantime, her daddy bought her a game to help her pass the time in jail. Her mama and daddy took her by Center Street Elementary to tell the teacher that she would be absent that day, maybe even for a whole week. Miss Wills wrapped her arms around her. Audrey knew that she was proud of her. She said goodbye to her grandparents. "You'll be fine," her grandmother said. She knew Audrey would be okay, and so did Audrey. Then her mama and daddy drove her to 16th Street Baptist Church where the children were gathering. And even before she reached the door, Audrey heard loud voices chanting freedom songs. Inside, hundreds of big kids called out to friends and crowded around signs for their high schools, Parker and Carver. Her head swiveled. Where was the sign for Center Street Elementary? She was the only protester from her school, the youngest child in the whole church, and she knew nobody. Audrey huddled by her parents in the basement. But when Jim lined her up with the others, 2 by 2, and the doors swung open, Audrey straightened up. She was going to break a law and go to jail to help make things right. Clutching a protest sign in one hand and her game in the other, Audrey marched out the door. She stopped and she sang, "Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around." Half a block from the church, a white policeman stopped Audrey. He pointed towards a police van. Sentence, 1 week in juvenile hall. A matron locked Audrey into a day room with 2 dozen children, other girls, all older, all bigger, all strangers. Audrey sat down alone and slipped the cover off of her game. "I told you to sit down," the matron yelled. Audrey jumped. She did not remember standing up. The matron dragged her to a dark, empty room. "When I tell you to do something, you do it, or else I'll leave you here." Trembling, Audrey quietly followed the matron back into the day room, put away her game, lay down her head, and she cried. Jail was harder than she'd thought, and she was not fine after all. By evening, Audrey was hungry and tired. For dinner, soup with oil, tasteless grits. At night, a bare mattress with one thin sheet for a cover. Audrey and her cellmates were led outdoors, into an empty concrete pen surrounded by prison walls. The older girls talked together. Audrey wondered what her classmates were doing. Miss Wills would probably be keeping them busy. On another day, Audrey was sent to a huge room and told to sit in a chair that was so high her feet dangled above the ground. 4 white men glared at her. She had never talked to a white man before. "Are you against America?" one demanded to know. "No, sir," she answered politely. "What do you talk about at those meetings?" another one asked. "Our freedom." "But why did you march?" he asked. "To go places and do things like anybody else. And what's wrong with that?" Every mealtime, Audrey stared at her greasy grits. She could barely spoon them into her mouth, let alone swallow them. Every night, the cot's wire springs jabbed her back. Every morning, she had nothing to do but sit alone with her game. In the afternoons, though, more kids crowded into the day room. Some days, many of them arrived sopping wet. A girl explained that firemen had aimed powerful hoses at the children. Surging waters spun them off their feet and down the street. They got up and kept marching anyway until they were sent to jail. By Audrey's 5th day in detention, the police could not squeeze in one more person. "We filled all the rooms! We filled all the rooms!" Aubrey practically jumped up and down. She was so proud. Watching television in the day room, she saw black people stroll straight into stores and restaurants like they had belonged there. No one else could be sent to jail. Everything had changed. After 7 days, Audrey went home. Her mama and daddy wrapped their arms tight around her, washed the jail off of her, and for dinner, hot rolls baptized in butter. Two months later, the city of Birmingham wiped segregation laws clean off the books. Audrey licked her spoon clean at Newbury's counter like everybody else, black and white together like we belong. And that is the end of the story. I thought I would read the author's note, which is about the true story, because this girl is a real person and all the events that we just read about actually happened. So I thought we'd read a little bit about her and the history of this story. Every day Audrey Faye Hicks spent in jail, her mother Lola called someone she knew there to make sure her daughter was safe. The day after her release, Audrey returned to Miss Willis's classroom. She did not tell her class about marching or going to jail, though. It did not dawn on me that it was a big idea, she had said. But it was. Audrey was one of more than 3,000 children who were arrested in Birmingham, Alabama, in May of 1963. The Children's March, which was planned by Reverend James Bevel, Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., affected not only Birmingham but America. That summer, young people held protests in nearly 200 cities. President John F. Kennedy spoke on television about prejudice and sent a civil rights bill to Congress. On August 28th, about 250,000 people marched onto Washington, D.C. to hear Dr. Martin Luther King preach about his dreams of freedom. This writer, the author, she had the honor of talking with Audrey in her home where she had grown up. She showed me the table at which Dr. King blessed their meals and the upright piano where she had practiced singing civil rights songs, including I Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around. Audrey told me that she had remained an activist afterwards. She volunteered to integrate a high school, enrolling as one of the first black students there. It took a while for whites and blacks to work together, she had said, but it was what we fought for. After graduating from college and working in Dallas, Texas, Audrey returned to Birmingham where she taught preschool and led a Head Start program there. 10 years later, she earned a graduate degree researching women, like her mother and herself, who were involved in civil rights movements. Schools around the country invited her to speak about her experience as the youngest known marcher. She was nicknamed the Civil Rights Queen, and she died in 2009, which was 11 years ago from the year 2020. But this is her story. She's someone I don't think I ever learned about when I was a kid in school, so I really liked reading the story and learning more about her. And there's lots of other civil rights activists that go unnoticed that we don't get to hear about every day. So I hope you guys enjoyed this story and have a wonderful day.